Farah. I have a special guest today, Stephanie McClellan, and so happy to have you on. So thank you for agreeing to come on today. For those who don't know me, my name is Farah, and I'm the proud founder of International Nurse Coach. And today we're going to be talking about leadership and how to really prepare our next generation of nurses for leadership. So, Stephanie, again, thank you so much for coming on. And if you want to just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Farah. This is exciting. Again, my name is Stephanie McClellan. I'm the current president of the Delaware Nurses Association and proud president. I am all things nursing advocate and nursing leadership. And I actually graduated from an ADN program. Got my
Okay.
LPN. Yep, got my LPN in 2009, and then went on to get my RN and finished in 2010. And recently, not too far before you, completed my doctorate in, yay,
Awesome.
completed my doctorate in nursing practice. Yeah, with a focus in visionary leadership. I completed in August of 2023. So, yeah,
That's
the journey of a nurse is never done.
I know, right? Thank you so much. And I know that, that doctoral program must have been challenging. Like I said, I just finished recently, and mine was in organizational leadership as well. So I wanted to say hello to a few people. Hi, Latasha. Thanks for joining us. And if you guys are watching, let us know where you're watching from. Um, what country, what city, let us know. She said, me too. I love this. So proud of you.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Latasha.
Yes.
So today we're going to be talking about all things leadership, kind of what the good, the bad, and the ugly of what leadership looks like in nursing, and kind of like what your thoughts are for the new generation. So I guess we could start out with saying, what do you think the current status of leadership in nursing? Like, what are your thoughts, just generally, on leadership in nursing?
Um, I think it's a tough time to be a leader in the nursing world. There's a lot of constraints that are put on us that are different
Mhm.
than what they used to be. We're challenged with different a set of financials, a different set of staffing patterns, a
Mhm.
different set of staff expectations, and sometimes there's not a lot of clarity in what your role actually is as a leader, which can lead to some confusion at times.
Right.
Um, so I think it's a tough time to be a leader, to be in my opinion.
Right. I agree. I mean, especially I think post COVID, it caused a lot of
Mhm.
issues as well with, staffing is obviously always a big issue globally, I think, for nursing. Um, and I think as well, morale of the staff
Mhm. Mhm.
is a big issue because of
Yeah.
the staffing, obviously. And like you said, financially, you see that these
Mhm.
organizations are trying to maintain, a business because coming from Canada to the US, to me, it was so different, right? The healthcare system was different, and the whole shift was really, more business focused. I feel like in
Yeah.
the US. So to me, it was kind of a shock, culture shock coming here because it's so focused on money,
Money.
uh,
Mhm.
and really, they say, right, they want to improve outcomes and safety, but sometimes you kind of question that a little bit
Mhm.
because sometimes, you see with staffing in the ER, I used to work in the ER, and they used to say, well, we can't have any more overtime. I'm like, okay, so we're just going to keep working short. So
Yeah.
then what happens, right? These nurses get upset because the ones that don't call out, they're just getting burnt out,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
So
I think
balance that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a really fine balance between getting the right culture
Hmm.
in any organization, department, division, whatever, having that culture and then having the leadership that aligns with that culture so that you can get the staff behind it. It's a very fine line. That it's interesting that you bring up the ER because that's like it happens everywhere, right? Have you ever
Right.
had an ER that was fully staffed? Have you ever heard that? Does that exist?
Right.
um,
Yeah.
and it's not because there aren't organizations that have an amazing culture and amazing leaders that are behind it. So what is that like magic sauce that helps to create that? I don't know that anybody has the answer. I think it's a work in progress, but I
Mhm.
mean, you're definitely on to something that we haven't figured out exactly what it is yet that helps safety, security, morale, staffing, finances. Like, what is that magic sauce that puts all of those things together to make it work?
Right.
And I think we're also challenged too because nurses are coming out of nursing school with a different set of skills and
Mhm.
expectations on how to use those skills. And then when you get into clinical practice, patients want something completely different. They're very demanding. So
Oh, well, yeah. It's it's definitely changed,
yeah.
from before, obviously safety and quality are at the top, but
Mhm.
patient experience
Mhm.
is extremely important, and I
Yeah.
see why it is because as we know, even if you're on the other side of, being an actual patient or having a family member, you know how important that patient experience piece is.
Mhm.
And and it is, and if you think about it, they are paying money for it, right? So it's
Yeah.
like it's a service. So yeah, it's very tough to kind of balance. What do you think about the education and the training for leaders? What are your thoughts on that? Because I have a lot of thoughts on leadership and how kind of leaders are onboarded or orientated. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I have a I have a couple thoughts on that too. Um, when I was in my very first year as a leader, the organization that I was employed for did not have a formal orientation process or structure, if you will, for leaders. There was nothing formal in place.
Hmm.
I was given a mentor and a guide really that was internally within the organization to help me navigate the things that I would need to know for the organization,
Right,
and then like policy structure, things like that. During that same year, I attended the AONL's, or it was AONE at the time, their nurse
right.
manager fellowship. And that honestly was hugely beneficial to me at the time, because it gave me an outside picture of what others were experiencing and thoughts and ideas that I could
Mhm,
easily take and run with. You hear that term low hanging fruit all the time. Um,
mhm,
but that was my first year in a formal leadership position. Since then, that organization has put into place some formal orientation and training for new leaders, and it's an ongoing thing, maybe 6 to 9 months or so to be fully oriented into your role, and you still get assigned a mentor, which I think is a good thing. But I have lots of peers in other places that there's nothing formal, there's nothing offered to them. You're given the job,
mhm.
and you're said, okay, it's yours now. Go for it. And I think
Exactly.
that is a huge failure, because leaders need support too, and leaders need structure, and leaders need to know what the expectation is, and then how do I get from point A to point B. And you don't get that when you're taking a master's program or a doctorate program. They're not training you in the skills of leadership. Those programs are based around theory. um,
Right.
and evidence-based practice and clinical frameworks. They're not based around this is how you square away a budget, unless you're taking a business class, in which case it's
Right.
not a healthcare budget.
Yeah,
So
you
we have,
hit
we have a
like
huge gap there.
yeah, and this is something that I mean, you hit on a lot of points, but it's very clear when you talk to a lot of different nurses everywhere,
Hmm.
even in Canada, that there is no real, like you said, no
Hmm.
real structured orientation or onboarding for leaders.
Hmm.
And if they
Hmm.
do, it's very rare.
Yeah.
And I post all the time on LinkedIn, and recently I posted something saying that leadership is a specialty, right? So,
Hmm.
would you expect, let's say, a med surg nurse to just go into ICU and just say, "Oh, here you go, just go ahead, just start
Hmm.
functioning in there"? No, they get an
No.
orientation. When you send somebody
Yeah.
to the OR, they get like a 6 month or more orientation. So, why is it different in leadership, right? It's a
Hmm.
specialty. Um, and this is why I think some leaders are overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't gotten really the structure of how things should be, and they just kind of wing it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, there's a lot of misconceptions about leadership, right? So you talked about theories, right? So everybody talks about transformational leadership and all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? But honestly, I think the old school way of leading is what some new leaders think that they should be like authoritative. And
Yep.
we all know that does not work. So I think they get a little confused. And then, especially if they've been a staff nurse and they now go to a nurse manager
Mm-hmm.
position, it can be very difficult
Mm-hmm.
than coming from the outside. Um, so, I think team building and those types of things, and I think empathy and kindness is really lacking in leadership.
Yeah.
And it's almost like some people think, well, you can't be too nice or empathetic because you were the boss. So,
Mm-hmm.
what are your thoughts on that? And I want to say thank you to MJ for being here. MJ, thank you. And she's saying fundamentals of management and leadership is very much
Yes.
needed. Thank you.
Yes. We both agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with everything that you just said, Farah. I think that empathy is lost. And I think a lot of people do think that they have to be authoritative in order to get their point across. And that's actually not the case at all.
Mhm.
I think when you can empathize with your staff, and even like your directors, the people that you work with, I think it shows how human you are and that things impact you too, and that you actually do understand. And it's okay to reinforce that we still have an expectation that we need to do, but how can I meet you in the middle so that we can still get the work done?
Right.
Everything is not a jack and a hammer. It's just, it's just not. With that being said, though, I think every leader needs a trusted ally in their life. And it doesn't have to be somebody at their organization, but it needs to be somebody who's going to say, you didn't handle that situation correctly. And why don't we unpack that a little bit more? Or you did exactly what needed to be done in that situation, but now you're going to have some work to do with your team so that they trust you again. You need
Mhm.
people like that in your life that are going to keep it honest and keep it real with you, because if you go around thinking that everything that you're doing is perfect and you're not making any mistakes as a leader, you've already failed. You failed yourself, you failed your team, you failed the organization. No one is above reproach.
Yeah, I think you make some great points because I think, even just as a nurse, depending on what position you have, feedback is very important, even though it is tough to take. But I think feedback, constant feedback, you should
Yeah.
be as a new leader seeking that feedback.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, having mentors is extremely important,
Hmm.
even if it's not within your organization. It might be even better if it's not within.
Right.
And I believe that you should have multiple mentors, like,
Hmm.
even maybe somebody who's really good with finance and doesn't even have to be a nurse,
Yeah.
right? That you
Yep.
can have as a mentor,
Hmm.
so things like that. So, what would be your tips for new nurses that are looking to get into leadership positions? What would you think that they should be doing?
So I actually have someone that I've been working with right now. She's not a nurse, but she's interested in leadership. And when I asked her what type of leadership she was interested in, she was like, I don't know. So I challenged her to spend some time with a couple different types of leaders in different areas so that she
Mhm,
could identify what are things that she likes and what are things that she doesn't like, and what are things that interest her that would be a challenge, because you can't just pick a job because you like it, because what you like today, you might not like tomorrow.
mhm,
But I would say the same thing for nurses who want to move into leadership positions. There's nothing wrong with doing something that's not traditional. Why do you need to be a bedside nurse and then a clinical coordinator and then an assistant nurse manager and then a nurse manager and then a nurse director? Why do you need to do that? If you want to be a leader in a completely different area of the hospital or outside of the hospital in community care, that's okay too. Sometimes you don't
mhm,
know what you like until you go and explore it. So that would be the first thing that I would say is try, go meet with people, sit with them, do 4-hour shadow, have them talk to you about what their day-to-day stuff looks like, and ask them tough questions. What do you job? What do you not like about the responsibilities that you have? What do you love about it? What keeps you up at night? Asking those questions is a great way to help spur your own thought process around things that you might want to do. And I would also encourage people to look outside of their organizations. One job at one organization might look completely different at another organization, but have the same title. So there's nothing wrong with that either.
Right. So you mentioned some great points like clarity. That clarity is important for them to really find kind of what leadership position they want. And something else I think that's important, like you said, is I think a lot of people have that doubt or that fear to become a leader because they think, well, maybe I'm not qualified. Like, oh, maybe I need an MBA to be a leader. It's like, no, you don't need an MBA. Nothing against people that have MBAs that helps you. But I think a lot of nurses are afraid to take that step. And then sometimes they're kind of almost pushed into it. So they might start out as a charge nurse.
Right.
And then they're like, hey, we don't have anybody. Like, do you want to be an assistant nurse manager? And then they may not have time to really process it. And they're like, yeah, okay, sure. And then they may get into that role and like love it. Or they may be like, you know what? I don't know. This is not really what I signed up for, because it's very different than dealing with people. You might be behind a desk a bit. So you have to think about, what type of, if you thrive in like connecting with a lot of people, you got to see what type of roles that you would want to get. Because, coming from the ER and like running around everywhere to being like in one space can be very hard. So I think you're right. They need to really understand the role, really what they're expected in the job description.
Yeah. I think to that point, succession planning is really important.
Right.
Because just because you have someone on your team that's a charge nurse doesn't mean they want to follow in your footsteps.
Right.
And so having those conversations up front and continually throughout, the year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever that you're in that role is important, because you don't want to create a succession plan that ultimately is going to be a failure because it's not something that the person's even into.
Exactly.
And I don't know that we really do a good job of having these honest conversations with nurses that are interested in leadership jobs. We may sell them something they don't even want.
Yeah, exactly. Or there may be some people that have great leadership skills that are not really speaking up, like you said.
Yeah.
So I think for a novice nurse that maybe just wants to go into leadership, you definitely have to articulate and communicate that you are interested in these roles. Because if nobody knows, then you may not have those opportunities.
Yeah.
So I think shadowing, like you said, is important, and taking on more responsibility, perhaps getting a certification. So I got certified as an NEA nurse advanced executive advanced certification. So if you feel like you need a certification, you can go ahead and do that because it'll prepare you a little better. But like you said, nothing really prepares you more than actually being in the role of leadership.
Yeah. When I sat for my nurse executive certification, I didn't even really know what I was sitting for, to be totally honest with you, because it was a requirement for my job. I met the minimum qualifications. My my one-up at the time said, you need to sit for the exam. I said, okay. And I signed up for it and I went and sat for it. And it wasn't until afterwards that I was like, oh,
Yeah,
I get it now.
right. But you don't necessarily need certifications, because I think a lot of nurses are very, as myself, we're always go-getters. We're always trying to do the next thing. Oh, we should get this certificate. We should do that. We should do that. But like sometimes you are already qualified and you just need to go for the position.
Yeah.
I wanted to say hi to Ashley. Thank you for coming through. And if you guys have any other questions about leadership or any comments, concerns, put them in the chat. Even if you're watching the replay, you can definitely ask questions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Oh, somebody said a comment here. This is Latasha. Taking accountability is very important. Yes. And being trustworthy. Yes, that is a good one, because so I don't know if you watch there's this guy named Gary V. I don't know if you know who Gary V is, but he's like big in business and marketing. And he says, if your business is failing or if it's thriving, guess whose fault it is or whatever, right? He
Mm,
says it's your responsibility. It's your
yeah.
so really like taking accountability and not blaming others. So I think
Hmm.
that is huge, Latasha.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that can be hard for leaders to do sometimes because
Mhm.
they think if they take accountability openly with their team, that is a failure. And that's not a failure. That's actually a win.
Right. So I know as humans, as we're on this topic, it's always easy to kind of point out the negative. And I
Hmm.
think a lot, being a staff nurse for such a long time in the ER, and even in general, I think people are like, they want some praise and recognition,
Hmm.
right? They want opportunities for growth. So I think that's important because as a leader, if you're constantly pointing out
Yep.
negative things about your team, then it's going to be, you know, like, oh, why are we meeting? Maybe you should be having a meeting to give some positive feedback. So what
Hmm.
are your thoughts?
Yeah. I agree with that. I'll tell you, I just recently led a difficult discussion with my team about employee engagement. And it was a difficult conversation to lead. And I took accountability and responsibility for the way that the team felt and how they responded. And my follow up to them was now we need to have more open, honest conversations about how we got to this point and how we as a team are going to fix it. And I told them, I said, I accept it. It is what it is. If you responded in this way, it's because you felt that way. And I appreciate your honesty. And now we have to work together to improve in these areas. And I'm sure I have made a lot of mistakes, far from, far from perfection. But I do think that there's a lot of value in having those conversations with your staff. And I think there's a lot of value in having those conversations with your one up, the person that you report to. Um,
Mhm.
being honest and being vulnerable to say, we're struggling in this area. We're not talking about it. We're not doing a good job getting to the root of what the actual issue is. And I need some help. I need some support. Or I'm failing because I have X, Y, and Z going on, and I am not getting what I need to do a better job and to be a better leader. And there's nothing wrong with saying those things. And I don't know, honestly, that we do enough of it. But it is
Yeah,
important. It's valuable.
yeah, you brought up some great points. I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier about being a member of the AONL. That is the organization for leadership. So
Mhm.
I think investing in professional organizations is important, and also being a part of a community and going to these conferences or
Mhm.
events can be very, very helpful. And even for those who are out there, if you're not familiar with the ONL, definitely go and just type type it up in Google. They have different frameworks and different models about leadership, and you can learn a lot. So if you have maybe an upcoming interview for a leadership position, you should definitely be familiar with their mission, vision, values, and their frameworks on leadership because it can really help you. And then, tying into that is professional development. I
Mhm.
think organizations need to invest in their leaders, um, and neither leaders can also, take accountability for their own professional growth by going through, educational things. But I think organizations, if they can support it, it's even better
Mhm. Yeah.
to send their teams. A lot of them have retreats, like leadership retreats and things like that, and I think it really helps.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. Some of the things that we've done in the past as a team, like our leadership team,
Mhm,
is like crucial conversations and crucial accountability. And instead of using their scenarios, we use scenarios within our team to help us break down like what some of the problems and issues are. A few years ago, I actually sent my entire team to do crucial conversations together because I felt
mhm.
like there was a breakdown in that, and if you take the full thing, it's a whole thing. It's not just like go for 1 hour and listen to someone talk to you. Um,
Right.
but that is also a lost art. And I don't know if that is because of the changes in healthcare because of COVID, structure changes and things like that, how we had to kind of conform to keep our organizations going. But people
Mhm.
don't get together in person anymore. You'll have a meeting and everybody's in the same hallway and they're in their office with their door closed on the Zoom instead of just going to the conference room. And I think a lot of that trickles down to the team. And so if we were doing more things face to face and going offsite and having retreats and doing professional development as a group, it makes you, number one, it makes you more cohesive. It enhances communication, and then it breaks down that barrier that could potentially be there where you're misunderstanding each other or missing out on verbal cues or body language or things like that that are often not addressed. I saw a quote recently that said, unspoken expectations lead to basically disappointment later on.
Right.
And
Mhm.
I think that happens in leadership too.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you brought up some good things. I think for those, like we talked about, the next generation of leaders, right?
Mhm.
Um, Always effective communication is so important, and like you said, clear communication to understand what the expectation is and even the job description. So for
Yeah.
those new leaders maybe that are in a new position and you're not really sure, I think one big thing is to go through the actual job description with your direct, supervisor to really be clear on what it is that the expectation is,
Mhm.
what the job performance is, what you would be expected to do.
Yeah.
And then I
And then
think, oh, go
and
ahead.
and in addition to that is meeting with your direct report frequently to talk about
Mhm.
those things.
Right.
These are accountabilities that you've placed on me, but I'm noticing that this isn't actually happening, or this is going to be unachievable because of this reason, or we don't have the resources to
Oh,
complete this function of the job.
I mean, you just brought up something so good. You just said that you won't be able to do something specifically, right? So I think as nurses and nurse leaders, sometimes you need to learn how to say no
Yeah.
because so much is put on you. And I know some people
Mhm.
that are like working on the weekends, like doing all these things, and I'm like, no, you got to say no.
Yeah,
Like
you have to say no.
you can't just keep taking on and taking on.
Mhm.
And you need to learn how to prioritize needs. What is most important. So, like you said, I think communication for those who are
Mhm.
out there, really making sure your communication is clear, effective, and then transparency is so huge because a lot
Mhm.
of staff, or even, and it doesn't, we're not just talking about hospital. This could be anywhere that you work as a leader. Um, Being clear and being transparent, I think, is so important because you will lose credibility if you're not
Yep.
transparent and clear.
Yep.
Um, and then change management is another big one. I know we can't get into too much, um, but I think that's why sometimes when leaders are trying to make change
Mhm.
and there's resistance, I think that's an issue because of the lack of
Mhm.
transparency and
Yeah.
and what's going on. So if you wanted to
Yeah.
touch
And
upon that.
if your change management process has 15 steps, then sometimes by the time you get to the end, it's not even going to work anyway.
Yeah.
That's an
Okay.
inefficiency in itself.
Yeah, what is Ashley saying? She's saying with the prediction of over 800,000 nurses that are supposed to leave the bedside within the next 3 years, how do you think that the nursing leadership role will be affected?
Yeah. Ashley, that is a great comment. When I did my dissertation just recently, I actually used that statistic in my dissertation as part of my defense for the work that I had done. Um, my work was around the lack of morale in leadership and how that affects leaders' decision abilities to make decisions. Um, and I have done a lot of thinking about this. If this prediction is actually true, and we do see a huge shortage of nurses in this capacity, we have to think differently about staffing models and how we can function at the top of our license and bring different layers to the bedside to help our nurses, because it will impact leaders. And then you're going to have a shortage in a completely different way. Leaders won't be able to fulfill the roles that are traditionally filled because the workload and the demand of the workload will be even greater. It's a huge trickle down, and it's quite honestly, it's something that we need to be looking at now and addressing now, not waiting until 2026, 2027 to think about how we're going to solve this problem. I do think that there has been a lot of work in the last couple of years around changing staffing models in organizations so that
Mhm.
there's more layers at the bedside. So if you're in a situation where you don't have as many nurses, how can you still get the work done with the nurses that you do have? What other staff can you put into play that will help you with those patient care things? And I think some of that stuff is actually really creative, using innovation,
Mhm.
different things with pharmacy for medication administration. Like some of that stuff, we're going to absolutely have to have it in order for leaders to be able to thrive.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and you brought up some good points. I definitely think, like you said, if organizations can think of creative ways to offset a
Hmm.
lot of the workload that
Hmm.
can be given, like simple things like, blood draws,
Yep.
IV insertions,
Hmm.
EKGs, those types of things, PCT, CNAs to help out. I know there's even in some hospitals, they have robots, I think doing
Yep.
one-to-ones or something I heard, like just,
Yeah.
innovation and technology definitely will be huge. Perhaps even AI and maybe documentation,
Yep.
um, things like that.
Yeah. I mean,
But
there's a lot of organizations looking at putting nursing students from the very beginning, like actually employing them at the organization in different roles and working around like their clinical hours and things like that, so that they're already functioning not as a nurse, but not really as an aide either, where
yeah,
they're still getting that clinical piece, but they're working and making money at the same time, and it's filling that staffing void. Some of those models are really creative, um,
yes,
and are
and
things
it
that we're
helps them,
yes, and it helps them, and the patient gets what they need, which is
right.
ultimately the whole reason that we're here anyway.
Right, and
Um,
it helps them with that transition to
yep.
practice because, we know that it can be a big shock to a lot of the new nurses. So if they're already integrated and getting paid and valued and part of the team earlier, there
Mhm.
might be a better transition to practice there. And in a couple of points, I know we can't get into too much because we're going to wrap it up soon, but I think retention is going to be a
Mhm.
game changer.
Yeah.
Organizations and leaders need to focus on retaining their staff, creating opportunities for growth, as we talked about, and creating healthy work environments. I know
Yeah.
it sounds cliche, but if we don't work on those things, then we're not going to retain,
Yeah.
the nurses.
Yeah, that's
And even,
100% true.
yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think a
even
lot of
with,
that go ahead, I'm sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
I think a lot of that starts with listening to your staff, finding out what are their pain points, and what are
Mhm.
their pain points that we can address and we can fix to make the work environment healthier and more suitable for them. And a part of that goes back to transparency too. There may be a pain point that there's something you can't do anything about. I understand that we can't change this, but how can we make this more doable so that when you're here, you can get your job done effectively and you're supported? But you have to listen. You have to listen to your staff. They'll tell you what the problems are with the work environment. There's no guessing there. They know.
Right, right. And even just simple things like making it more efficient,
Yep.
even physically, the environment,
Mhm.
things like that. And then I think really creating more transition to practice programs. Um, you know, uh, for example, there's a lot of nurses that maybe they're in med surge and they're tired of med surge and they want to go to a different area.
Mhm.
A lot of places don't have those programs.
Yeah.
So what will happen? They're going to leave and go somewhere else. So,
Mhm.
part of those strategies I think is important. So
Yeah.
just to wrap it up, what's your last words for the new generation? How are you feeling about leadership for our next generation of nurses?
Um, my last words for the next generation. Ooh, you made me think here, girl. I would say that if you are truly interested in leadership and you think that it's an avenue that you want to go down, pursue it and pursue it wholeheartedly. No one is going to chase the dreams that you have other than you. And no one is going to go after it in the same way that you would. A closed door is not a no. It just might not be the time. And the open door might be at another place, or it might be in a different area of nursing. So I would encourage you to go after those opportunities and seek them out. Find a good mentor who's going to be honest and transparent and help and guide you, not give you the answers, but guide you to your own decision making, because it's your future.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, don't stop. You know, we have what we have today, but we live for tomorrow. And the nursing workforce and the nursing profession and nursing leadership is not going to get better if we just give up and quit.
Yes, amazing. And, I'm very hopeful and positive too for our next generation, because I think our Gen Zs are very involved.
Mm-hmm.
They care a lot about, social impact and justice
Yeah.
and change and diversity. So I think really increasing diversity in our nursing workforce and leadership is going to be, a game changer, and really that advocacy piece.
Agreed.
Bringing new ideas and innovation, like you talked about earlier, is really just going to help the profession advance a little bit more. So not being afraid, like you said, to pursue what it is and bring up those ideas. And I always say, stir the pot and like challenge the status quo.
Yes.
And if you got to advocate, talk to these CEOs or CMOs, and really collaboration too, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, agreed, 100%.
So we have one more comment and then we're going to wrap it up. So following your nursing dreams, get a mentor and push through. Thank you for that. We don't know who it is. It says LinkedIn user. So again, where can people find you, connect with you?
Yes, so I am on LinkedIn, Stephanie McClellan. My last name is not on the screen, but we can get it up there. And the president of the Delaware Nurses Association in my third year of my 4-year term. And I am in a formal leadership position in the state of Delaware.
Awesome. Well, connect with Stephanie, connect with me if you haven't connected with us on LinkedIn. And again, thank you for coming. And if you have any other questions, comments, put them in the chat. And I appreciate you, Stephanie, for taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Thank you so much. All right.